So now, without further ado, I would like to hand things over to the moderator for the last session for today, Ole Dibawada, who is the Director of Human Capital, Youth and Skills of the African Development Bank.
Thank you very much. Good evening to all of you. As I've been introduced, my name is Oli Dibawada. Thank you for being here at the last plenary session, which focuses on the key messages from today's presentations. We've come to the end of an exciting and productive first day of the UHC Forum. We've had interesting sessions, listened to excellent presentations, and fabulous contributions provided by, which provides food for thought. So particularly how we're going to achieve UHC. As you can see on the panel, we have purposefully selected a brilliant panel to provide closing reflections, to summarize the key messages and to re-emphasize the objectives of the forum and importance of UHC. I would like to introduce the first speaker, Dr. Yasuhiro Suzuki, Chief Medical and Global Health Officer, Vice Minister of Health for Japan. Dr. Tim Evans, Senior Director, Health, Nutrition and Population at the World Bank. Dr. Naoko Yamamoto, Assistant Director General, Universal Health Coverage and Health Systems at WHO. So, Dr. Suzuki, can you share with us Japan's experience as well as the position of Japan as a major donor country promoting UHC?
Thank you, Oli. On behalf of the host country, Japan, and as a former colleague of Tim and Naoko, let me kick off reflection of today. Three issues. First, the early investment is better. For Japan, back in 1961, when we first introduced the universal health coverage, we were still depending upon the World Bank loan. Thank you, Tim. And actually, the first bullet train, Shinkansen, when we started operating in 1964, the exactly same year, the last Tokyo Olympic Games, we borrowed money from the bank. As shown in the example of the Saku City today in the breakout session on community-based approach in 1961, when Japan achieved the universal health coverage, the rural areas in Japan were still very poor condition. As stated in today's discussion, strengthen health system at the early stage of the economic growth is very important. Thereafter, we can move to the correction of the disparities and the income redistribution. That's I think, lesson number one we've learned. And secondly, as you can find in the Kashiwa City's story in the breakout session, it is the story of aging session. The example of how to integrate elderly care into the community care. We were able to introduce long-term insurance and the community-based integrated care before population reached the peak of the aging in the very rapid pace of aging. So that is I think the second lesson we've learned. Our experience is that we can safely say that it is essential to take into account the future prediction of the demographic transition well before when establishing the design of the healthcare system. Those are the two issues we've learned. And secondly, the issue is the political commitment. And we have had a lot of stories about the political commitment today. And I think it's very historical to find that the president of the World Bank and the director of the Health, Nutrition and Population are both MDs and both ex-WHO workers. I think it's a very historical moment. And I think we should take the best advantage of it. And we have initiated the process of the universal health coverage back in 1958, when Japan was very, very poor. And there was a cabinet decision to determine that we are going to have the universal health coverage. And we are going to have the medical school in every prefecture. Those are the financial protection and the expansion of the service. And those are the very issues we have introduced well before the economic growth of Japan. So those are the issues I think is very important for Japan to take into account. The other countries can take into account. So these are the lessons I think we've learned. And I'm very looking forward to tomorrow's high-level discussion, heads of states, heads of international organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suzuki. I hope that someday the African continent would really pick up on some of the lessons learned moving forward, particularly on universal health coverage. But coming up to Tim, what is the World Bank's? There've been a lot of discussions on the challenges, that are being experienced to achieve universal health coverage. What is the World Bank's perspective on these challenges, and what are potential opportunities to accelerate progress towards UHC?
Well, thank you very much. And just carrying on from Hiro's remarks, I think it's important to know that both Jim and I didn't leave WHO voluntarily. But we're delighted that the World Bank took us in. Because as my family motto goes, it's much easier to make a mess than clean it up. So in terms of the challenges, I think what we can say is that we're quite convinced that business as usual is not going to get us to 2030 and achieve our aspirations for UHC. And I think this is why, in the context of this forum, we were particularly interested working with partners to begin to articulate what business unusual looks like. And my remarks this evening are just going to be, in some sense, the areas where we think there's unprecedented opportunity for innovation, but ones that we're going to have to, as a community, more systematically seize. Because if we don't, then we'll end up being pushed around and buffeted by the forces that are shaping the system, which may not necessarily take us in the direction that we think we need to go in order to achieve universal health coverage. So let me just identify 5 areas. The first is service delivery. It has been said that there will be no UHC without PHC. And I think that's fair to say. If you think about the importance of every individual having contact with the system, you have to have a credible front line and things. However, at the same time, the World Health Report in 2008, entitled Primary Health Care Now More Than Ever, had as its second chapter the importance of UHC. And so its premise was there will be no PHC without UHC. And so I think this sense of anchoring the front lines in a larger system is absolutely fundamental. And what are the ways in which you can strengthen that front line? We're coming up, as people have said, to the 40th anniversary of Alma Ata. And as somebody who has just recently achieved that milestone in his own chronological age, I'm a big believer that life begins at 40. And so what does PHC at 40 look like? And I think as a global community, we've got 10 short months to put that together. But I think first and foremost, we really need to think about not only person-centeredness, but the participation of people in the design and the delivery and the evaluation of their own systems. We need to think about coverage with quality. We need to think about a workforce that is fit for purpose, and it will be and remain in contact with the population. And as we've been working with others, trying to develop effective measures of performance so we know where the system's working well and where it's not satisfactory. We have to do that in a context of disruptive innovations. And tomorrow we'll be doing an innovation fair called Business Unusual, called Drones, Phones, and Bonds. And this is just a recognition that there are forces of change which are not from within the health sector that represent opportunity, but they need to be looked at much more systematically. So that's the first area, service delivery. Second is financing. And here I'm going to take on the challenging issue of domestic resource mobilization. And I'm going to say yes, but. Yes, we need to increase public financing, tax collection, strengthening transparency, decreasing leakages, getting rid of useless subsidies for energy and agricultural subsidies that are no longer useful. And we need to look at how to grow the share of public financing for health and draw on sin taxes where possible and where they work. But all of this we need to do more of, and in some respects, it's sort of more of the same, which doesn't take away from the importance of doing it, but I think we don't have our eyes on the right target. And if you calculate the global value of out-of-pocket payments in 2015, it's $500 billion. And it's growing at somewhere between 3% and 5% per annum. Now, these are the worst form of payments of expenditure in health systems. $500 billion is a huge amount of money. What is the opportunity of finding 21st century mechanisms through things like health wallets and behavioral economics to get those contributions into prepayment and pooled funds? If I were an entrepreneur, I would say that's a massive market that's worth seizing. So we need to keep our eyes on the OOPS, the out-of-pocket payments. The third area is that as we've seen as of late, and as we're constantly reminded unpredictably, is that we don't only operate in the health sector in peacetime. We are operating often in crisis. And for those of you who work at the World Bank, it's a crisis every day. But we do have these crises in which we need to think much more effectively about how we mind our blind spots. And this relates to the challenges of financing preparedness and One Health. It sounds simple, doesn't it? One Health. But try to do it, because you've got to orchestrate across multiple sectors of governments, most of whom see the other sector as an enemy. Health, agriculture, disaster risk management. These are the groups that need to come together and figure out how to develop that preparedness capacity. It isn't as simple as a public health problem. But at the same time, we have the issue and the challenging issue, and we may be able to learn something from the environmental sector here, is in terms of how we understand co-benefits. So if you look at the AMR agenda, and we have one of the world's premier leaders of AMR in the room, Dame Sally Davies, she has led us towards having a major focus on antimicrobial resistance. And the tendency, if we follow 20th century global health, would be to verticalize it. And indeed, we may need to have purpose-specific funds for AMR. But how do we evaluate the benefit of universal immunization with pneumococcal conjugate vaccine in terms of its impact on AMR, and not just its impact on child survival? And I would argue if we began to do that more systematically, we would see increased rates of return to investments that we're making that are good enough in and of themselves, but may decrease the extent to which we need to think about mobilizing new vertical resources for new priorities. The last two areas in preparing for uncertainty relate to the challenge that we know in many contexts, regional entities provide scale efficiency in terms of highly technical reference laboratories or training cadres of health workers in specific types of illnesses or diseases. And one of the challenges we have, however, is making dedicated regional allocations in the context of national budgets. How do we sustain regional mechanisms that we know make sense in terms of their scale efficiency, but which don't correspond with easy domestic financing? The last area in preparing for uncertainty is the whole area of contingency financing. And this reflects the fact that most public accounting systems are not well disposed to mobilizing large amounts of money quickly to attack and respond to a problem. And so thinking about how we do that both with public resources and tapping innovative private sector mechanisms like catastrophic at-risk bonds is something that we're particularly interested in the context of the PEF. Two more areas. Do I have time? Okay, then I'll be quick. We have to take a new approach to development finance. And here we need to think about how can development finance be both catalytic and contributory to domestic resource mobilization. And if we think about that on UHC, can we develop evidence of what corresponds as value-added investment from a DRM perspective in terms of strengthening a country's ability to finance universal health coverage? Last thing, on governance. This is a hugely important area. Often, politicians that do the right thing are in office the shortest period of time. And so how do leaders make sure that when they're leading ambitious reforms, they don't get voted out of office? And I think I'd like to share two things. One is to recognize that there is such a thing as short-term wins. If Recep Akdag was here, former Minister of Health from Turkey, he would tell you how when he led the health transformation program in Turkey in 2003, the first thing he did is he outlawed keeping patients in health facilities until they paid their fees. And that was universally popular in Turkey, and the government's ratings in the polls skyrocketed. The cabinet thought he was brilliant, and with that, he bought the trust and the time to lead a whole set of much more difficult reforms, including, for example, managing the challenge of dual practice. So you need to think about not only staying the course in terms of the long term on UHC, but also identifying some short-term wins that are going to keep you in a position to move towards universal health coverage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. Yes, business unusual rather than business as usual, and disruptive innovation. I think those are the key words or takeaways. Same to Dr. Naoko. I think I would like to ask you a similar question of the WHO's perspective, really looking at the challenges, but what are potential opportunities moving forward? I'm sure yours would be shorter than Tim's, no doubt. Thanks.
Of course, we just discussed that I give my time for him. But first of all, I really would like to show our appreciation as co-organizers, so all participants, to contribute this forum. Thank you very much. I would like to pick up them 3 points. First, is this forum brings together about 500 participants, more than 70 countries represented, which means that the global community plays extremely important on UHC. And also I very encourage very many young people participate in this forum. Of course, relatively young people is also welcome, but the young people is our hope. And also we share the vision that the UHC is not only about the health. It's about the finance. It is about the social system. Also, it is about the job and human rights issues. And my second point is, many speakers mentioned, including myself, several times, like regarding a huge number. It's half of the world population still doesn't have access to quality of essential health care, or 100 million people are being pushed into the extreme poverty because of the health care cost or expenditure. But at the same time, this forum reminds us or reiterate us that the severe and diverse reality we are facing. Many speakers bring a lot of experience which show that in the world, many people in the ground suffering or struggling, and also working hard to overcome our challenges. So it's a good, very important opportunity to face for all of us. And final point is, this morning I said that universal health care, or UHC, is, we believe it's achievable. And during today's whole session also convinced us that, again, we can achieve UHC. There are a lot of efforts, many ideas. Tim mentioned about innovative ideas, but we convinced we can do it. So I said, this is a time to move from vision to action. This is our message from all of us to send to tomorrow's political discussion, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Yamato. From vision to action, indeed. I think that's fundamental. So, one more round of applause to our extremely brilliant panelists who have summarized the technical messages and implementation and lessons learned from today's sessions, but have also set the stage and instilled excitement for the high-level UHC forum for tomorrow. So to all of you, I say a big thank you, arigato, and once again, have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And thank you to all of our speakers today. We'll see you all at the reception tonight and tomorrow at 8:45. Thank you.